Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about, does Google even care about core web vitals, and should you? We'll just give it a little minute to wait for people to trickle in. If you could drop in the chat where you're joining from today. It's always cool to see where everyone's joining from. Hello from New York, Derby, Switzerland. Oh, Anne is here. Hi, Anne. California, Manchester. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today. Jess, if we pop onto the next slide, please. I'm going to hand over today to Jess and Caleb if we just get an introduction from you both.
Yeah, I'm going to go first. I'm Jess Peck. I'm a machine learning engineer and recovering technical SEO at Local SEO Guide. And I think the Core Web Vitals initiative is good in that I think it does make some annoying parts of websites less annoying. I'm being very cautious about that.
Okay.
Caleb, do you want to intro yourself?
Yeah, my name is Caleb Romo, former coworker of Jess. Still very much a technical SEO, but my title is Senior SEO Manager at the Grit Group. I've been doing SEO and website stuff for about 12 years. And if she's sharing her overall view, then my overall view of Core Web Vitals is that, we came to the same conclusion. Good for users, and we'll get to whether it's good for Google too.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you both, and I'm very excited for this. Jess, if we just go to the next slide, and then we'll go over the agenda. So just some brief introductions and housekeeping, and then we're going to do reminders and definitions. Does Google care about Core Web Vitals? Should you care about Core Web Vitals? And as we go through, we're going to be asking for some questions, and then at the end we'll go over some questions and answers. So next slide, please, Jess, and I will just talk about some housekeeping. So yeah, we're very open to questions. Any questions you have, please drop them in the Q&A, which should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We're very welcome to any feedback that anyone has from today. We will be sending out a short survey, and anything is appreciated. And this will be available on demand. This live recording is going to be shared on the blog, so be sure to check that out there in a few days. Next slide, please, Jess. Just want to make sure that everyone knows that you can enable closed captions for today's webinar, along with a live transcript, and the webinar recording, as I mentioned, it'll be available on the Lumar blog with full subtitles in a few days. So before we get started, I think we have some questions. The first question for everyone: do you care about Core Web Vitals? And this is just a very simple yes or no. We didn't want any fence sitters today, so do you or not? Once we have that in, we can see how everyone's voted. So yes, 94% of people do care and 6% of people don't. Now, for the next question, do you think Google cares about Core Web Vitals? And then this is a yes or no response again. And it'll be interesting at the end to see if anyone's opinions have changed on this. So do you think Google cares about Core Web Vitals? Yes or no?
I do kind of want to say special shout out to the like couple of people who don't care about Core Web Vitals but are still
Right?
watching this webinar.
That's great.
Like, yeah, expand your horizons. I'm impressed.
It gets them out of whatever else they had to do today for a little while.
Yeah. Okay, so 92% of people think that Google cares about Core Web Vitals, and 8% of people do not. So thank you, everyone. And I think I'm going to pass over to Jess and Caleb now. So thank you both.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Hey, Caleb.
Hey.
Are you ready to talk about Core Web Vitals?
I mean, I guess.
So figured we would go over some quick definitions in case people clicked on this webinar without knowing. This will be fast. Core Web Vitals are some different metrics, page speed and user kind of metrics that are gathered from real world user data. And then you can use stuff like Lighthouse to get the synthetic version of those Core Web Vitals.
That said, if they're wildly off, you should definitely trust what the Core Web Vitals information in Search Console says, as Lighthouse can be wildly off, sometimes broken, depending on how your site is configured. So don't only trust Lighthouse. It's easier, it's quicker, but it's only there to try to mimic what Core Web Vitals is doing.
Yeah, and if you have a monster machine and your users are mostly visiting on like Dell laptops from 2008, you're going to have a much better Lighthouse score because you've, even with throttling, honestly. Do you want to talk about largest contentful paint, Caleb?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory there, but the largest thing, basically, sometimes, mostly, usually, depends how good Google is at parsing what's on your website. The largest thing that you can visibly see in the viewport is the element that Google's going to call the largest contentful place. The largest, how long it takes that largest element to load as the page is rendering. This is very often a large banner image or occasionally a hero section or H1. That was actually a new one. I've usually mostly ever seen, large images or H1s. Recently had the entire H1N banner section declared by Google as the largest contentful paint element.
Fascinating. That's a big H1.
I'm not sure how Lighthouse arrived at that.
I recently had the largest contentful paint was a really high quality video background. Like the entire site had a video background.
Yeah.
And it took so long to load.
It's always gonna be like 35 megabytes too.
Yeah. And the client was like, can we just if we lazy load the images below this, is it gonna speed anything up? And I was like, no, sorry, this is like, you can have a perfect Lighthouse score, or you can have your big video image at the top of the page.
That's what I want to see as a user when I get to a page, is a giant video. That's exactly why I came to a website page. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We can talk about first input delay, which that's a you can measure.
It's the time between when a user tries to put an input in, usually like maybe a click or a tap or something, and when the browser responds. So sometimes when during script loading, they try to click something, but that interaction is sort of hung up until the browser can finish parsing whatever else it has to parse or load, and then there's a delay from when they click something and when something happens. Are you okay with that definition, Jess?
Yeah, we can like, there's wiggle room there, but I think that's pretty much the definition.
Okay, well, FID matters less anyway. One, because it's getting replaced, and also you're much more likely to be failing on LCP and CLS.
Yeah, and I want to take cumulative layout shift because I like talking about it, and this is why I actually enjoy the Core Web Vitals as a thing, is because this is one of the most annoying website things to me, is when you go to a website and you click on something, and in the time that you are taking to like go to something and click, the entire website shifts and then you're clicking on something else. So it's basically cumulative layout shift measures as the page is loading how much stuff jumps around on the page. And it does this with the size of the objects that are moving and how much they're moving. Yeah, so we're also going to talk about interaction to next paint a little bit. It's going to replace first input delay. This is the responsiveness of the page by looking at the latency of all user interactions like clicks and taps, and it creates a single value. And this is the time from when a user initiates that interaction to when the next frame of the page is painted on the screen and gives visual feedback. And I think this is a really interesting one because it does rely on user interactions with the page very directly. So a user clicks on something and the time it takes to load stuff or change stuff is where the score comes in. And I think this is going to be an interesting one to watch evolve over time. So these are our like definitions. I don't know, Lighthouse is a tool that you can use that is you can look at the page speed insights site or in the inspector element and use it there. I don't know if there's anything else we want to define here. We could talk about Crux as well, which is the Chrome user experience report, which is a big amount of data about Chrome user experience. Do you have anything else you think people might be baffled by, Caleb?
I'm not sure. It's so hard to know what other people don't when you've been in it for so long.
It's true. We have been working the
mines,
the data mines, as they say. So let's get to the question of the hour. I was really surprised to see so many people think Google cares about Core Web Vitals.
Not that Google doesn't, but
not that Google doesn't, but like there is a discussion about it.
Actually, what I'm more surprised about is how many people said they care about Core Web Vitals, considering how many sites fail it.
Ooh, that's a call out. That's a call out to everyone with a slow website. So our quick answer to this is I did like Eric Hoover's comment here. I don't think Google's cares as much as SEOs care, including this SEO, which yeah, I mean that's basically our quick answer here. Like, if your site is so slow Google can't render it, or like it takes 10 seconds to load, Google probably doesn't care that much about Core Web Vitals. Like,
it's probably not helping your crawl budget either.
Yeah. Yeah, and like, I mean, Google doesn't want to serve super slow pages in general. Like, they care about user experience to that extent, you know?
But if your website is so gosh darn useful and helpful in other ways, and you at least clear that minimum bar of Google being able to see your website, then I wouldn't necessarily expect all that much benefit.
Yeah.
It's not the thing to focus on.
Yeah, exactly. You know, this is from the Mueller's mouth. Just because your website is faster with regards to Core Web Vitals than competitors doesn't mean come May you'll jump to position number 1 in the search results.
Will you go from position 12 to position 11? Maybe.
Ooh, yeah. I also think if you have everything else like is perfect, but your site's really slow and you make it fast, you could probably see some substantial ranking increases. But, you know, if you have everything else, all the rest of your house in order and are just a really slow site, I haven't seen that very often. Like, I think usually sites that are slow have several other issues as well. I don't know, Caleb, if you want to argue with me on that case.
No, not really. There's going to be a slide later, which is going to be pretty contradictory to what Google says.
Yeah.
But you have to keep in mind that some sites are going to be. We'll get to that. I
Yeah.
don't have a quibble yet.
Yeah.
I have an asterisk later.
I did like John made a really good chart.
Professionally done.
Just the lots of money going into the search advocacy graphic design budget, I think. But basically, poor sites don't get punished, and good sites get a minor ranking boost.
Supposedly.
But like, if you have other stuff wrong with your website, you should don't probably prioritize Core Web Vitals, I think is that's what I tell clients, at least. Like, if none of their internal links work, I'm not going to say speed up your site first.
In my tech audits, I put speed behind everything else. Even schema things that are like, maybe you'll see some sort of mild kind of benefit or change, or relational kind of change to this. I still put speed usually behind that, unless there's some glaring issue, which we'll get to.
Yeah. So we have data. This is exciting. This is 2022 data.
This is from app.wattspeed.com, by the way. Highly recommend that. We've got a few graphs from there, but looking for, like, why should we look for the data? Someone's already done it for us. So big thanks to them.
Yeah. And you don't really need the boost to be in position 1. Like all things about ranking, this is a correlation versus causation. Sites that care about SEO might care about Core Web Vitals more, or sites with bad Core Web Vitals probably care less about other SEO things and so rank less. But I mean,
the correlation here is still pretty slight.
Yeah. Even with all that being said, there is a correlation, but it's not huge. Oh, yes, I forgot. Whoa, what the heck?
Look how flat that line is. Incredible. Yeah. So the first thing that might come to mind is, does Core Vitals matter less now than it did 18 months ago? Genuinely, maybe, after the helpful content updates and such. And I mean, there have been plenty of core updates, so it could very well be the case that Core Vitals matters less now than it did 18 months ago when that other chart was from. But if you want to go to the next slide. Or did many sites who could benefit most from a boost in speed already fix their Core Web Vitals? If some certain percentage of sites fix their Core Web Vitals, and it appears that a lot more sites, a lot more web pages were failing and are no longer failing, then, if it's sort of flatlined on that front, then maybe things evened out a little more.
Yeah. And the more people, I just agree with you there. I think
well, disagree with me. Oh, please can we disagree on this one? Come up with an alternative.
I'll come up with an alternative hypothesis while you talk. Let me work on it, okay?
Okay, so if you do look at the data, you start seeing, relative to position, how are people doing on Core Web Vital metrics? I did replace FID here with INP, but you might think, oh, there's a negative correlation. It may be the case that sites that are already doing very well have enough on their plate that they don't need to worry about Core Web Vitals. They're not trying to, they don't need to sort of inch ahead in any way they can to beat the competition, because they're already doing quite well. I mean, think about like large publications. I have CNN pulled up in another tab, and it's loading like over 5 megabytes of completely unused code, but 15 total. I have Wired open in another. It's loading 20 megabytes of code. The thing is, I can say that when I want news, I'm going to get to CNN regardless of how slow it is, or how long it takes to load, or how much unnecessary code it's loading. Same thing for Wired, frequent reader of Wired. So these websites may have other things going. I mean, obviously do have other things going on besides Core Web Vitals. That may be what we're seeing here. We are not necessarily suggesting, having looked at these graphs, that you go make your LCP worse.
I think that's going to be my counter. You should, I think, let's make up a conspiracy theory right now. Core Web Vitals are a conspiracy by Google to trip up SEOs, and they actually like it when the sites are slow and unusable.
It could also be the case that, you know, the people vying for, the people who are in position like 14, they're like, well, what can we do? What's easy to understand? You know, oh, I can make my website faster. That's a little easier than writing a ton more content. You know, results are a little more scalable if I affect all LCP images on the site. So they're fighting for position 10 and 11 and 12, whereas the position ones don't need to. The websites that already benefited or could have benefited already mostly kind of have, possibly, to an extent.
I think you also see like catalog sites with a lot of images. Like, depending on the sites, it's difficult to get that Core Web Vital down. Core Web Vital score, like, get better Core Web Vital scores on certain sites that kind of by design are going to be slower and clunkier, just because of all of the stuff they need to work properly. So yeah, do you want to talk about this slide? I think this is a Caleb special.
Yeah, kind of. It comes up a lot. So we are looking at, you know, there are ways that Google can care about how fast your website is that has nothing to do with Core Web Vitals, and isn't necessarily something that, you know, Google's going to. I feel like Google probably should talk about it more. It's when things are loading so slowly, or when you're loading so many assets per page that Google sort of gives up halfway through and moves on to your next page. As an example, I've got a coverage report on the right here. We have 7 megabytes of unused code. Last time I was the web admin of a large website, I had, I think, 200 kilobytes of unused code loading per page. So I didn't have a single page over 2 megabytes total, used or not. So to see that they're loading 18.3 megabytes of everything, JavaScript and CSS is kind of like a wild. Didn't expect that, especially for how well they do. And then, you know, there can be examples where you can see in when you inspect a URL in Search Console, there could be internal assets that Google just sort of, you know, gave up on if you're loading 133 assets, for example.
And we will talk about some of the ways you can deal with these specific issues later, because these can actually really help Google crawl your site well.
You always want to make Google's job easier, and you want Google to see your web pages as your user does. And so here are some examples of, you know, here's a web page as a user sees it, and then on the right is how Google might see it if your website is just so slow that it gives up trying to render your page halfway through. And obviously, Google doesn't want to send someone to the page on the right compared to that page's competitors.
So I think one thing that can be useful to take away if you're an SEO who is talking to clients is, while Core Web Vitals might not matter from a ranking perspective, speed specifically can matter for getting Google to look at your site, and Core Web Vitals can be an easy way to communicate that to your clients. Like, they have a catchy name and everything,
and they're color coded and stuff.
Yeah, you can show a pretty graph. Clients love pretty graphs. You just show a pretty graph and say, this is bad, and it's a lot easier to kind of get across than the last 3 slides. If I say that to a C-suite person, they are going to fall asleep on the call, you know. Not me. I'm excited about it. So here are key takeaways about Google caring. Do you want to take the first one, Caleb, and we can go back and forth?
Yeah. So does Core Vitals matter to rankings? Less so when you're trying to go from position 10 to position 1. But I mean, occasionally, rarely, when the competition is very close. When it is kind of like they've backed away from the coin toss phrasing. It's like a tiebreaker. That's the phrase they moved away from. It could be, Core Vitals can be a tiebreaker, that kind of thing. They have moved away from that language, but I mean, in a rare case, we definitely recommend improving pages rather than not doing so, just in case on that rare chance going from you really could go from position 2 to position 1. It's just that we wouldn't necessarily always expect that to happen or often expect that to happen.
So before you're worrying about Core Web Vitals, before you're worrying about speed, you should be thinking, like, look at other technical SEO issues on your site, crawl it, use Lumar or other tools and find the things that are actually going to substantially prevent Google from crawling, indexing, and rendering your site.
And outside of technical SEO, think what kind of terms do I want to be seen in SERPs for? And then just you'd be amazed how many people don't do this. Imagine you're a user and you got to that page. Would you find that page helpful, or would you be annoyed that this page does not provide what you were looking for in an easily accessible manner?
Like when I'm doing technical SEO audits, if all I've got left is to talk about is like Core Web Vitals, usually I will say to the client, you should talk to our editorial team for a bit and see if they can improve your content, because that's probably more pressing than getting your site speed done. And if the developers are bored and need something to do, then speeding up the site can probably be useful. But
I want to very quickly address something William said. If Google, now debatable, takes into account bounce, so it seems that some recent filings have disclosed that it's not bounce rate per se, but if someone clicked on a page and maybe went back and then tried to click another page, that's a very bad signal for the first page they clicked on, isn't it? And I can say, as a very impatient person, I do not think patience is a virtue. Patience is a willingness to have one's time wasted. Efficiency is a virtue. Okay. As someone who has very often tried to click on a result, and what annoys me most is slow server response time, where like nothing's loading. It's not even a blank, render blocking kind of issue. Just, the initial response from the server to get anything back is taking, if it takes longer than 1 second, I immediately bounce back. Immediately. I do not care what was on that page. I will find it somewhere else. So yeah, speed can matter in that regard. Slow server response times are a major cause of speed issues.
And yeah, I think we can move on to our next section, which is, should you care about Core Web Vitals? So we've talked about if Google cares, if you're thinking about it in terms of ranking. We are now going to talk about an overall holistic approach. So it is the opinion of Caleb and I that you should care about Core Web Vitals, even if from outside an SEO perspective, because it's good to have good websites. Caleb, do you have anything to add to it's good to have good websites?
I don't know. I kind of want to argue about something just for the sake of like, no, it's good for you to have bad websites.
Bad website. No, users care about site speed. Users care about, like, the reason Google is pushing these is because users care about them, because users don't like being annoyed.
Google does not necessarily, in general, Google does not necessarily want to be known as the search engine that sends people to bad websites.
That would be an incredible search engine to have, though. I'm going to design a search engine that only pushes bad websites. I like this cartoon a lot, Caleb. This is from the
it's not mine. I've got the tab where I got it from. I apologize if whoever made this is in the chat right now and I did not credit you. I meant to prior to this, but time got away from me. I have the tab open somewhere. I can try to find it later, but yeah, I did not make this.
From Jaffa the Cake, who is a web person on Twitter and a good follow. So yeah, we're just making
what if it's a big hoax?
Yeah. The evidence for site speed and other Core Web Vitals is you get more visitors, lower bounce rate, people finish the conversion chain faster. I can say this as both a user and someone who I used to work at CVS on their analytics implementation, and you did see a big change whenever you fixed something and it got easier to check things out from site speed, from like user experience. Like we had like improving a site speed for just like free signups improved the amount of free signups by a ton, because people bounce when they hit a site speed problem. People get bored. I get bored. I have stopped using websites because they are too slow. So we can talk about some case studies. These are the kind of classic ones that come up. Vodafone improved their largest contentful paint by 31%, and that led to an increase in sales and a 10% rise in organic search traffic. We don't know if that last one is correlation or causation, but the increase in sales probably has something to do with that. We can also talk about Renault. These are all very English examples, I've got to say. They had a 1 second improvement in their largest contentful paint, and that led to a 14% reduction in bounce rate and a huge boost in conversion, a 10%, 13% boost in conversions. And then eBay improved their time to first buy, and that had a 0.5% increase in add to cart clicks. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you have a site like eBay, 0.5% increase in that kind of click can be a lot of revenue. So I'm gonna, Caleb, do you have anything to say about like a little case study section here?
Not necessarily. So at a couple jobs ago, I was the website everything for a larger company than you would think. I was hired as the SEO, but eventually became the full stack developer and the content writer and the strategist and the designer and the graphic designer. And if it went on the website, it was through me. And we had an unusably slow website, but then with a couple of changes made on a single Friday, it became one of the fastest in the industry. So we did see a major boost to conversion. We wanted people to schedule an appointment for a particular service. But that was such an extreme example that I hesitate to say, we improved our core web vitals from slightly failing to passing. No, it was in the category of unrenderable. So when it came to finding other specific case studies, my current data set is a bit limited. Because it's very often the case as a third party, as an agency, when you're working agency. I mean, I'm sure this is the case for internal too, but last time I was internal, I was the one making the changes. It can be hard to get buy-in from developers to care about site speed. The developers who are all in on the JavaScript rendering, React, etc. craze, especially. So I do not have any specific, I can't point to any specific case examples with specific percentages, but yes, increasing speed does help conversion rate.
Yeah, and we know Google cares about user experience even outside of this idea of core web vitals. Like, we know that they have different ways that they look at it. But even if they didn't, users care about user experience. And in the end, like SEO is about getting users to your site and then having them do something, or getting ad revenue is, I guess, the other one. But if you want them to stick around and look at your content and get your ads, or you want them to sign up for something or buy something, this can really make a difference. This is on that CRO kind of train.
But also as a future-proofing bit, let's say, for example, let's say that Google currently, like Google says they care about user experience. Let's say Google is not currently very good at it, for whatever reason or another. I would prefer to err on the side of Google eventually getting better at it and caring more about it. So even if you don't necessarily see a core web vital boost right now fixing issues, it's still a good thing to do in case Google does care about it more later or get better at determining that later.
Or if one of your competitors starts caring about it, and you know, you're in that kind of range of like, people are going to make a choice. You don't want them to choose your competitor over you just because your site's slower. So we put together a couple of things about how to measure and fix this. Unfortunately, we are going to talk about using GA4 very briefly. I know people are not super happy about it, but I would really recommend Simo Ahava, who is really good at analytics, has a really good guide to tracking core web vitals in GA4 using Google Tag Manager. And I would really recommend taking a look at that if you do or deal with analytics implementation. We also have a couple of quick wins that you can probably use today if you want. These are things that I have found across websites, or Caleb has found across websites, that you can just kind of make some changes and relatively quickly get a little boost. So use fewer fonts. A lot of sites use multiple fonts and that's fine, but you can actually specify down like only use the bold font from this thing, and the more specific you get, the less fonts have to be loaded, and fonts slow down your site. If you check the CSS file and there is CSS added with the @import rule, you can remove that and change it so it doesn't do that, and that can be a huge speed boost. Also using the media attribute for conditional CSS. So if you have a print specific CSS thing, using the media attribute can actually help pages not load that CSS, and that can give you a speed boost as well. Another thing that we see often is people will, you go up to a client, you say you should lazy load your images, and then they lazy load all of their images without thinking, and then the images that are above the fold get lazy loaded too. You want to lazy load everything that is outside the viewport. If it's in the viewport, don't lazy load it.
Especially your LCP. Please, your big blog image at the very top, don't lazy load that. That's so weirdly common.
Yeah, this is a really common thing that people mistakenly do. And you can go check your client sites or like your site and make sure you're not doing it, because this will kill your core web vitals. You can lazy load videos and iframes. And again, it's all about the viewport. If you can see something, you want it to load fast. And if you can't see something, it can wait a little longer to load. And then if you preload render critical assets, like, again, if it's critical to the render, if you want it loaded, load it faster. Caleb.
Yes. So I may have accidentally put some redundant tips in some duplicate slides.
Let's find
coming.
out.
It depends on. Oh yeah, I sure did.
Yeah.
But hey, it's important. Okay, to preload critical assets.
We're just gonna hammer that. Yeah.
Actually, that's most of it. Most of page speed is asset load prioritization.
Yeah.
Oh god.
There is a really good Smashing Magazine article about the best optimized head. And it just goes like how to optimize your header for the best speed boosts. And I'll drop that somewhere after this because it can be really useful.
I do also want to point out, put render critical CSS. Like, you can preload a CSS file, but it'd be better to just the stuff that you need to see within the viewport before scrolling. Everything critical for above the fold rendering, put that in a style tag in the head, and it didn't really fit in the little box here. Make sure later loading CSS, those rules don't conflict with earlier loading CSS rules. That's going to be a very common cause of cumulative layout shift.
Yeah. And then a couple of cumulative layout shift and layout tips. If you use font display optional, you can prevent the kind of shifts that you get from loading in fonts. Make sure your images and boxes have sizes that used to be the like wisdom, and then it stopped being the wisdom because we got responsive layouts. It's kind of back to being the wisdom again. Your devs should be able to make this something that is flexible to different layouts, but this lets the browser kind of create the shape of the page and not jump around as new stuff gets loaded in. And don't load conflicting CSS rules. I feel like this is me throwing stones in glass houses a little bit, because my personal website, I have a ton of conflicting CSS rules because I get bored and change them without fixing them. But
I just went on a rant to like the whole JavaScript rendering craze. My personal website is also JS rendered. So do as I say, not as I do. That website is not supposed to rank for anything. It's there for tax purposes. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's I think this is kind of our quick wins section of things. Hopefully you learned something here, and even if Google doesn't care about CLS and doesn't care about speed, it's good for you to do so. That's our conclusion. Oh, I do like William Harvey's comments here. I didn't put in my analytics things because last time I did, Patrick Stokes got mad at me. But cache your HTML, optimize your Google Tag Manager and what you're adding, and if you're heavy on the GTM, think of moving server to server, and rel preload your fonts. Thank you, William. Those are really good.
I'm not recommending it, but one time I had an issue with typekit fonts being very slow. So I may or may not have allegedly started loading as much of those TypeScript files internally. I'm not sure if that violated anything. So supposedly, allegedly, in Minecraft. So the so cache your HTML. I would add that see what your developers, if you're doing sort of JavaScript rendering, see what your developers can do about pre-rendering or server-side rendering as much as possible. If you do not need the large dynamic sort of things that JavaScript can do for you, if it's going to be a mostly static page, see what you can do about pre-rendering and server-side rendering and hydration and that kind of stuff.
And I mean, like, it's all about thinking about rendering and the order of rendering and the amount you're like bringing onto a page. A lot of the time, especially with JavaScript, developers will overwork the main thread. They're like, which is when you're loading an HTML page with JavaScript, when you're loading the DOM, there is a main thread that most of the work gets done on, and it gets done in the order you are putting stuff on the page. So if you put heavy stuff at the top of your page, a lot of the time, if the browser hits the like heavy thing, it will go and deal with that before it continues with your page. And this is why people use async. This is also why you can occasionally like delay things like analytics. If you don't care that much about your analytics, you can,
well, if your site's fast enough, if your site's already pretty darn fast, delaying, deferring, she likes async, I like defer. If you defer unimportant scripts, I think like tracking pixels and stuff, make your site fast enough where deferring those won't really matter all that much to what you're trying to be tracking. If your website is very slow, then deferring analytics could mean missing out on, multiple seconds of user interactions. But if your website is pretty darn quick and you just want that little extra 10%, then deferring something like analytics to where it loads, let's say it loads in 1 second rather than in 0.5, then that it can be recommended.
I have been very, very slowly trying to fix the Google Analytics snippet because I think it can be a lot faster, but I'll see if I can get that out at some point. Do we want to do questions? Should we do questions?
Yes, let's take some questions from the chat. What are the most common Core Web Vital issues and fixes that you've seen with clients?
Lazy loading LCP images.
Yeah, that's a big one. People will, again, developers need pretty explicit instructions, and if you say lazy load images, they will go find like the React lazy loading package and they will just apply it to the whole site and they won't think about it. I can say this because I am kind of a developer and that is what I would do if I wasn't thinking. So make sure your developers are lazy loading, not your LCP. What are some of the other ones tend to be just like one thing I like to check is sometimes devs will load in the entirety of a script package and they just want to use one function for something. Like, I want to have some cool imagery, so I'm going to bring all of d3.js into my page when they only need to really call one thing. So it can be useful to like take a look through the head, and if you see like a whole external script being sourced, be like, do you need all of this to your devs? Caleb, do you
look at your code coverage.
Yeah.
Now this isn't going to be a quick win, but it is like an extremely common sort of thing where very similar to what Jess just said, they're loading too much. They are even internally, not even external, but loading too much internally, just megabytes and megabytes of nonsense that that entire page templates or maybe nothing on the website actually uses. So that would be a discussion with the developer. Those could be difficult to diagnose and difficult to fix and difficult to optimize, as are server side issues that might cause slow initial response time. So maybe you've optimized, like once the page starts rendering, it goes very quickly, but it takes a really long time to get, those first sort of bytes from your server because you guys decided to host your website on a Wi-Fi enabled potato on someone's desk. So in that case, those issues can be difficult to diagnose, but can have a huge impact on all speed metrics downstream.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think Caleb and I will both say you don't need to know JavaScript to be like a good tech SEO, but it can be useful to know enough to tell your devs when they're doing something wrong. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Let's just take a couple more. Did your thinking about impact of bad largest contentful paint on ranking change when return to SERP rate was announced as a formal ranking factor recently as part of the Google antitrust trial?
No, not LCP. That server response time thing I mentioned, maybe like it's not a Core Web Vital, but FCP. I'm pretty forgiving of a website that starts to load and I can see the H1 and I can see where an image is going to go here in a second or two, a large LCP image, and I can see content below. I'm willing to just keep on scrolling, skip that large image that's inexplicably lazy loaded. I'm willing to skip that LCP in order to get to the content I actually like want to read. But if I click on a result and I see a blank nothing and the little loading bar is stuck at step 1, and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. Okay, I'm done. Bye. And that's going to count. That sounds like it would be something that would count in that sort of SERP pogo action where I go look for another result instead.
Okay. And then we'll just do one last question. Have you guys noticed certain CMS or website management platforms that have seen more Core Web Vital issues than others?
Yes.
I mean, there are a lot of horrible things you can do to WordPress.
There are. I was gonna say, my default answer is look out for React Helmet. I've been complaining about this for a year because React Helmet is something that React devs use it like protects your head. It's very funny, but like if you mess up with it, it inserts information and creates issues for some of the Core Web Vitals metrics.
You're right. That is very funny.
Yeah. But yeah, I would agree. WordPress, like, it's very easy to add a plugin and suddenly your page is 10 minutes slower. Minutes? I hope not. Sorry, go ahead,
I've used my development background isn't so much your JavaScript rendering stuff or WordPress. My primary background is in like large enterprise, like C#.NET kind of dealios, like your site cores and Sitefinities and Kentico. Anyone heard of Kentico? Horrible. So when it comes to those, there are some very cool tricks that you can do for server-side rendering. Highly recommend looking into that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of them, it is really how you set them up, but unfortunately people don't tend to, like, they'll start a site without talking to their SEOs or like developers who are good at site speed, and they'll start a Shopify site, add all the plugins and be like, what's happening? Why is this so slow?
I'm only loading 27 tracking pixels. I don't understand. And not deferring or asyncing any of them.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much. Jess, if we could just move to the last slide. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, Jess and Caleb. We have a QR code here. If you would like to request a demo of Lumar, you can scan that. The recording of today's webinar will be available on the Lumar blog in a couple of days. And look out for the next upcoming webinar, which is on November 29th, Website Accessibility Audits in Action. But thank you so much, everyone, for today, and have a great rest of the day. Bye.